Try this right now. Put down your phone. Don't check the time. Don't hum a tune in your head. Just sit there, in silence, doing absolutely nothing for the next 6 minutes. Most people can't make it past 2. Not because their willpower is weak, because something ancient inside them is screaming that stillness is dangerous. And the real reason is far stranger than we're addicted to our phones. Because long before phones existed, before agriculture, before fire even, your ancestors were already wired to hate doing nothing. Sitting still with an empty mind wasn't peaceful for them. It was a warning sign. And that warning sign is still going off inside you today, every time silence stretches a little too long. In 2014, psychologist Timothy Wilson ran an experiment that has become one of the most talked about studies in modern psychology. He placed participants alone in a bare room for 15 minutes, with nothing to do but sit and think. No phone, no book, no window with a view. Just their own mind for company. Beforehand, most people said they expected the experience to be mildly pleasant. Afterward, most reported it as genuinely unpleasant. But here's the detail that made headlines. Wilson gave participants access to a button that would deliver a mild electric shock, one they'd already sampled and rated as unpleasant enough that they said they'd pay money to avoid it again. And yet, when left alone with their thoughts, a striking number of people chose to shock themselves rather than sit quietly and think. Some shocked themselves more than a dozen times in 15 minutes. Does that sound irrational? It isn't. Not to the part of your brain that's been running the show for hundreds of thousands of years. Because for most of human history, an unoccupied mind wasn't a luxury. It was a liability. Picture your ancestors resting at the edge of a clearing 60,000 years ago. Physical stillness might have looked like safety, but mental stillness, a mind with nothing to track, nothing to scan, nothing to monitor, was the opposite of safe. A predator doesn't announce itself. Neither does a shift in weather, a spoiling food source, or a rival group approaching from the tree line. The humans who survived long enough to pass on their genes weren't the ones who let their minds go quiet. They were the ones whose minds stayed restless, scanning, predicting, rehearsing, even when nothing appeared to be happening. Neuroscientists call this baseline mental activity the default mode network, a set of brain regions that becomes active precisely when you're not focused on a specific task, when your mind is free to wander. For a long time, scientists assumed this network was simply idling, a kind of neural background noise. But research led by cognitive scientist Marcus Raichle showed something more interesting. The default mode network isn't idle at all. It's remarkably active, often consuming nearly as much energy as focused, effortful thinking. Your brain, it turns out, doesn't know how to power down. When you stop giving it an external task, it doesn't rest. It turns inward and starts generating one anyway. This matters because an idle mind, left with no external threat to track, doesn't simply relax into stillness. It starts running simulations. It replays old conversations, rehearses future ones, catastrophizes minor uncertainties, searches for problems that don't yet exist. Boredom researcher John Eastwood, who has spent much of his career studying why boredom feels the way it does, describes it not as an absence of stimulation, but as a specific, uncomfortable state where your mind is straining for engagement and failing to find any. Boredom, in his framing, isn't relaxation's cousin. It's closer to frustration, the frustration of an engagement-seeking system that has nothing to seek. Think about what that engagement-seeking system was built for. Your ancestors' minds weren't built to be pacified. They were built to search, constantly, for information that could affect survival. Where's the food? Where's the danger? What did that sound mean? Who's approaching and why? A mind that stopped asking those questions, even for a few idle minutes, was a mind that might miss the one signal that mattered. So evolution built you a brain that treats unstructured stillness the way it treats hunger, as a state to be resolved, not tolerated. This is why silence in a waiting room feels heavier than silence in your own living room with the television on. It's why a long car ride without music can feel almost unbearable, while the same length of time spent absorbed in a task passes without notice. It's why people instinctively reach for their phones the instant a line at the store stalls, or an elevator takes a few extra seconds, or a conversation lulls. You're not weak-willed in those moments. You're running a very old subroutine that equates unstructured time with unmonitored risk. Here's the twist that reframes almost everything about modern restlessness. Your ancestors' boredom, when it did occur, was almost always temporary and quickly resolved by the environment itself. A change in weather, a sound in the brush, a task that needed doing. The natural world is rarely truly silent or truly still for long. But your prediction-hungry, stimulation-seeking brain now lives inside environments engineered to remove exactly the kind of ambient engagement it evolved to expect. A quiet room, a long meeting, a 5-minute wait with nothing to look at. These aren't neutral pauses to your nervous system. They register as unusual, almost unnatural gaps, and your brain, true to its ancient programming, rushes to fill them with anything at all. A phone, a snack, a scroll, a worry. This also explains something curious about why distraction feels so good in the moment, but leaves you feeling strangely empty afterward. Psychologist Aaron Westgate, who has researched what makes mental activity feel meaningful versus merely occupying, found that not all stimulation is created equal. Idle scrolling activates your engagement-seeking system just enough to quiet the discomfort of boredom, but it doesn't actually satisfy the deeper drive underneath it, the drive for meaningful processing, for a mind that feels like it's moving towards something. This is why an hour of mindless scrolling can leave you feeling more restless afterward, not less. You silenced the alarm, but you never actually solved the problem the alarm was designed to signal. Now, think about how this reshapes your understanding of your own so-called laziness or distractibility. When you can't sit still with your thoughts, when you reach for your phone the instant a task pauses, when doing nothing feels almost physically uncomfortable, none of that reflects a personal failing. It reflects a nervous system doing exactly what evolution built it to do, treating unstructured stillness as an unresolved signal rather than a peaceful state. This is also why deliberate stillness, meditation, quiet walks, time spent simply sitting with your own thoughts feels so difficult to sustain, and why cultures across history built elaborate rituals specifically to make it tolerable. Chanting, breath counting, repetitive movement. These aren't decorative additions to contemplative practice. They're technologies your ancestors invented to give the engagement-seeking brain just enough structure to stop treating stillness as a threat. Even monks, whose entire practice centers on stillness, rarely sit in true unstructured silence. They give the mind an anchor, a breath, a mantra, a single point of focus. Because an anchor is what the ancient restless brain actually needs to settle. So the next time you find yourself reaching for your phone during an ordinary lull, or feeling strangely unsettled by 5 minutes with nothing to do, remember what's actually happening underneath that discomfort. It isn't a character flaw, and it isn't a modern addiction invented by technology companies, even though technology has certainly learned to exploit it. It's an ancient survival system, one that spent hundreds of thousands of years keeping your ancestors alert to danger, now finding itself stranded in a world that has, for the first time in human history, handed it far more stillness than it ever evolved to handle gracefully. Which brings you back to that 6 minutes of silence you were asked to sit through at the very beginning. If you couldn't make it, you weren't failing a simple test of patience. You were feeling, in real time, the exact same restlessness your ancestors felt at the edge of a silent forest. A mind built never to stop searching, now searching for nothing at all, and finding that unbearable in exactly the way it was designed to.